two people are going to help me introduce our next honoree, Eric Ward. First, we're going to see a short video from Nadine, who is hoping to do this in person.
Eric K. Ward is one of those people who moves through the world with authenticity and deep kindness, who sees through all the chaff and finds clarity, and helps others find it too. I know this because I've been honored to work with him. For several years, Eric and I have been co-hosts of Moment's Wide River Project, produced by Moment Live. Together, we've been exploring the complexities and challenges of the American Black and American Jewish relationship. As Eric likes to say, leading deep into the complexities, even when they're not politically correct, is how we learn about one another and grow. This matters to both of us because the bonds, as complicated as they are at times between American Blacks and American Jews, are a pillar of American democracy, something we don't want to lose. On a personal level, I love following Eric's winding trains of thought and learning from him. He has quite a life story, which you can read about in the next issue of Moment, in a profile by Moment Deputy Editor Jennifer Barty. So thank you, Eric, for all you've done for the world, for Moment, and for me.
Now I would ask Sarah Brenner, Executive Director of the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Washington, to come to the stage and tell us what comes to mind when she thinks of Eric.
Good evening. What comes to mind when I think of Eric Ward? Champion for justice, visionary in fighting extremism and anti-Semitism, bridge builder and steadfast partner and friend of the Jewish people. In this moment, as we face unprecedented rise of anti-Semitism, Eric Ward is speaking out against anti-Semitic acts, raising awareness among non-Jews and Jews alike, and calling attention to the pain of the Jewish people, as he's done for decades. Like no other voice, Eric is able to reach diverse audiences and help people recognize anti-Semitism in themselves, which is extremely special. He is remarkable in helping minority groups understand the power of standing in solidarity to fight anti-Semitism and racism. Through working alongside Eric, I've really come to know what true solidarity looks like. There are three things I want to call out here that are exceptional, and they seem simple, but frankly, they're hard in practice. First, being in authentic relationships and getting into them early before you need them. These are words of wisdom Eric shared with me, and let me tell you, he was right. Two, staying at the table when it's deeply uncomfortable, when we feel anti-Semitism, when we feel racism, and all types of forms of hatred, stay there and work through it. Three, showing up for others when you have something to lose. It's easy to show up when it's easy. It's hard to show up when we may lose something. These three things and all of Eric's messages and work have never been more necessary than they are today. And I'm grateful for the gifts that Eric has given me and the world. My gratitude to you, Eric, is endless. It is an absolute privilege to call Eric Ward a friend and a colleague, and to recognize Eric's incredible contribution this evening. Eric, please come up and accept your award.
So I only have 3 minutes. If you know me, you knew I grew up Baptist, and it takes me about 15 minutes to get into an introduction. But we're going to be brief tonight. My mom, who passed a little over a decade ago, used to tell me as I traveled around the Pacific Northwest in the country, often attending anti-Semitic meetings hosted by white nationalists. You might wonder how I got into those meetings. But she would, I'm going to answer that in a second, but she would say the further away you are from home, the more well-behaved you should be, because I won't be there to get you out of trouble. Now, I got into those meetings because at the core of white nationalism is anti-Semitism. It's not a part of it. It is the core philosophy that drives that movement. But the truth is that white nationalists, as I came to learn very quickly, didn't bring anti-Semitism into our communities. It merely organized the anti-Semitism that already existed. Those many decades ago, traveling the backwoods of rural America and urban centers, I learned one truth. There is no left-wing anti-Semitism. There is no right-wing anti-Semitism. There is merely anti-Semitism and how political formations and tendencies choose to consciously or unconsciously tap into it. There was another lesson as well, that by tackling anti-Semitism, we could inoculate our communities from an age-old conspiracy that sought to conflate the complex problems and relationships into our society into a bigoted theory that Jews controlled the world and sought to destroy the human race. Anti-Semitism has been used not only to attack the Jewish community, but also non-Jewish communities. I think of mass killings here in the United States, the attacks on Latinos in El Paso and Gilroy, California, attacks on African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina, and Buffalo, New York, and of course the attacks on the Jewish community in places like Pittsburgh and others. One truth became clear. While certainly racism, xenophobia, and anti-Jewish hatred drove those mass shootings, at their core, each killer believed that they were waging a war against the Jewish community, and that we as Black people and immigrants were nothing more than puppets being pulled on the strings of our Jewish masters. The truth was, anti-Semitism denies the legitimate grievances of marginalized communities in this country and flattens it to nothing more than a conspiracy to be ignored. This is why I've chosen to take on anti-Semitism, not as an ally, but because I recognize that Black liberation, the right to live free from fear and bigotry in this country, does not happen except through the liberation of all people. And that means taking anti-Semitism on head first. It's been an honor to work with folks like Sarah and Tanya in the room, who model each and every day the importance of building these relationships before we get into moments of tension, before we are in our feelings, so that when we sit around the table, we understand we must stay at the table, that it is a time for serious leadership in this country and outside the country. I'm honored to sit here and to receive this award in my last few minutes from Moment Magazine. The Wide River Project has been a place where we can model what it looks like to disagree and still be committed to moving forward together. There is not this kind of serious leadership in our country and in the world right now. The truth is always, we don't make peace with our friends. We make peace with our enemies. And to make peace with our enemies means seeing each other's humanity, even in the hardest moments. Thank you to the staff of Moment Magazine, who work with me throughout the year, mostly trying to track me down on the road, and who do so with grace and kindness as we try to explore these topics. I also want to thank everyone in this room. We are all part of a movement that seeks to build a society where everyone has the right to live, love, worship, and work free from fear and bigotry. I'm not going to speak a long time, but I do want to say this. In these days, let us remember, it is not our job to be walking memes. It is not our job to simplify things. Let us be the serious leadership that brings complexity and nuance, that demands the question for more information, not less. Let our debates strengthen democracy, not weaken it. Let us always think about what is next and how we get to that next together. The truth is this. When I was a kid, we used to play a game, If we were driving down the freeway and the brakes went out, here's what I would do. If we were in the zoo and the lion got out of the cage, here's what we would do. And as kids, we would argue about what we would or wouldn't do. The question that came up every year was, if I were in the midst of the 1960 civil rights movement, here's what I would do. And as kids, we were full of bravado. We didn't understand the choiceless choices of our parents and grandparents in the same way that it's hard to understand the choiceless choices of those who found themselves in the midst of the Holocaust. We were sure about what we would or wouldn't do, and we would argue. That question, what would I have done if I were, has always haunted me. 10 years ago, I realized I no longer had to wonder what I would do in that moment. And I'm here to tell you tonight, neither do you. The truth is that we are in a moment that isn't about left or right, or conservative and liberal, or Democrat or Republican. It is a question of inclusion versus exclusion. It is about moving forward together or battling our world into a disaster through silos. I'm here to tell you, whatever it is you would have done in the midst of the civil rights movement will be whatever you do when you walk out of these doors tonight. If we only do one thing, let us stand in solidarity, even in disagreement, even in the hardest days. Let us understand it is time for humanity to lean in together. Moment Magazine represents that public space. So when we walk out of this room today, let us make one commitment. Let us commit to holding this space where we can come together to disagree and to love. I'm sorry for your losses. I'm sorry for the pain and the horror that is occurring in this world right now, that is occurring in Israel and Palestine. But understand, in the hardest and the best days, I will continue to stand in the room with you. Thank you, Moment Magazine. It's an honor.